Welcome back to the Enchanted Tree and how it all began. Chapter 7. Everyone stood in silence as the mysterious figure moved towards them and began to cough uncontrollably, waving his arms about in the smoke and gasping for breath. "Oh, hello, Rodney," said the Queen. "Allergies still acting up. You really must do something about that smoke cloud you travel in." Everyone breathed a sigh of relief as the stranger pulled off his hat, picked up the Queen, whirled her around a couple of times and plonked a big kiss on her cheek.
"Hello, love. Let's get you then? Yeah? Just a bit?"
He grinned, but his sister shook her head and laughed.
I got to work on my entrance. What about a mischievous title go with my mischievous laugh? How does Rodney the Rascal sound? Or Rod the Rogue? Never mind. So where's the party then, eh?
He asked, finally stopping to take a breath. "Oh, Rodney, you are far too early, but it's always good to see my little brother. How's London these days?"
Mustn't grumble, love. Mustn't grumble.
What an extraordinary pair, for that lack of height in one was far surpassed in the other. Rodney was extremely tall, with bow legs and large feet. He seemed painfully thin, and Emily wondered if he'd eaten at all this year. His ears and nose were pointed, as was his chin, and his wispy black hair didn't look as if it had seen a comb in months. "Oh, what do you do in London?" asked Emily curiously.
I has a very important job, love.
Beamed Rodney, displaying an alarming lack of front teeth, which he had been without for so many years that the loss of them was felt less to be an imperfection as hard comes a necessity.
I looks after the ravens in the Tower of London. Keep 'em happy like. 'Cause if they ever went away, London would be doomed.
Oh. His little black eyes glistened as he emphasized this last word, and he winked at Emily. Emily decided not to ask any more questions. Rodney looked far too mischievous.
He's here!
Oh,
Your Majesty!
He's here!
We found him!
We found him!
The Signor's
We
here!
found him! The Signor! Everyone turned towards the door as a dozen little gnomes bustled into the cave, shouting and applauding themselves on their success. All of these little men wore pointed red hats, green tunics, and multicoloured stockings. They all had extremely long grey beards, which they kept tripping over every other step, causing their heads to lurch forward in a very amusing way. In the midst was an older, sleepy-looking gnome who they pushed towards the Queen. Queen Mab squealed with delight, jumped off her toadstool, lifted the bewildered tailor onto it instead, and began to tell of her terrible distress. Almost immediately, the sharp little gnome snapped his fingers and started to give orders.
Mamma mia, Signor! Let us hurry! There is no moment to lose. The guests will soon be here. Take me to the dress.
He demanded as he headed back towards the door. The Queen did as she was told, and all her fairy court followed too, banners and trumpets and all. "Wait!" she cried, suddenly remembering something. She turned to the bemused children and Henry. "You all must come too. I would love you to come to my party." And with that, she disappeared through the door, lost in the rabble of her excited subjects. All was now quiet in the cave, and the children stood looking at each other, not knowing whether they had dreamed this whole peculiar event. Henry ran around laughing, guessing what they were thinking.
So, if this was all a dream, how come we're still standing in an underground cavern full of doors? Come on, you two. We have a party to get to.
Henry bounded off towards the door, where a shy but helpful elf was holding it open for them. Emily and Thomas ran after him, This was too exciting to miss, and with their hearts trembling, they passed through the door. Chapter 8. The door opened into a redwood forest. The trees were so tall they seemed to disappear into the clouds, their trunks thick with the age of generations. Emily gasped in awe at the scene before them. Fairy folk hurried about here and there, preparing for the night's celebrations. A team of elves worked busily in the bushes, decorating with garlands made of autumn leaves and daisy chains. A couple of brownies cleared a mushroom ring of fallen leaves, while some others built a platform on which the band would perform. One of the tree trunks had been hollowed out, and inside there were dozens of little tables with toadstool chairs. The smell of fresh baked bread and cakes wafted through the twilight. "Where are we?" whispered Emily. Rosebud was just passing and heard her question.
"We are in the Enchanted forest,"
she said before flying off, scattering fairy dust over the bushes. The magic dust turned into sparkling lights that shimmered between the leaves. Cool! Oh, gosh! It's all so amazing! Emily sat down on a mushroom and shook her head in wonder. Pardon me, miss," spoke Peggy in her usual soft way, "but don't fret yourself. You entered our magic world when you came into our cavern. Those doors lead to many different places, and to many different times even. You have come to our fairies' feast. Just believe in the magic that brought you here, and enjoy yourself." With that, she reached into her pocket for a treat, but on finding no more biscuits, she rushed off to look for helpful Hob to bake her some more. Emily looked around for the others and noticed Thomas and Henry watching Rodney perform some card tricks and laughing heartily. The musicians had now arrived and were warming up. Emily was surprised to see the bandsmen were no other than the gnomes who they'd met earlier. They had an assortment of fiddles, harps, tambourines, mouth organs and cymbals, all making a terrible din at the moment as they had no music to follow. The gnomes called themselves the Trellwinds and had all added a glittering gold bow tie to their outfits for the party. Oh, which reminded Emily that she wasn't dressed to attend a banquet. That's you. Which reminded Emily that she wasn't dressed to attend a banquet.
"Not to worry, come with me,"
said Rosie, reading her mind and leading her down a crooked path away from the others. In a clearing were several fairies giggling as they put on their makeup.
"Excuse me, godmother,"
said Rosebud.
"Emily needs your help."
She gently pushed the little girl towards them. The fairies immediately cried out and surrounded her, draping her in different coloured fabrics that they had gathered from hanging branches. One fairy liked this material, another liked these jewels. Some others began to play with her hair, and very soon Emily was transformed. Meanwhile, Thomas and Henry had grown rather anxious, looking for her. They couldn't believe their eyes when this girl came towards them. She certainly resembled Emily, but so changed. She wore an emerald green gown of the softest silk, trimmed with gold brocade. Her hair was twisted to a peak and decorated with golden stars, and on her feet she wore delicate silver slippers to match her dress.
Wow, Em, you look amazing. This is so fun.
yelled Henry, jumping in circles.
Come on! The guests are starting to arrive.
Henry was right. A stubby, red-faced goblin was announcing the arrival of the next Honourable So-and-so, while several visitors already milled about. There was the Queen of Elfland, the King of the Pixies, the Morning Fairy, and the Green Lady of Caerphilly. There were wood fairies and hedgerow pixies, silkies and gilly-doo. All kinds of fairy folk with accents from all over the world crowded into the forest that night. Ahem! The goblin cleared his throat and banged on an enormous gong that took several minutes to calm down.
I would like to announce the arrival of Her Royal Highness Queen Mab.
The goblin bowed and moved to the side to allow the birthday girl to enter. All eyes were turned towards her, and Emily held her breath, hoping that her dress was mended. The crowd gasped as the Queen walked forward. She was absolutely beautiful. Signor de Stoffer had done an excellent job. All was perfect, from the jewels sparkling in her hair to the silver glittering on her shoes. She was quite a sight to gaze upon. Oh, thank you all so much for coming, said the Queen. Please find your place at table, and may the feast begin. The gnomes began to play a soft melody as the guests bustled about, finding their seats. All places were marked, and Thomas and Emily and Henry found they were sitting at the top table with Queen Mab, Rodney, and other noble persons. What an honour indeed!
You look pretty, Mabby,
whispered Henry. Why, thank you, cooed the flushed fairy. To be quite honest, I could kiss myself, I feel so pretty. Emily glanced down to see who would be sitting opposite her and saw the name Titania, and next to her was Oberon. This could not be real. Emily gaped at the beautiful pair approaching the table, escorted by fairies, and one particularly playful-looking sprite all dressed in green. He sat down next to Oberon at the place marked Robin Goodfellow. Puck, gasped Emily, not intending him to hear.
You all right? I am that merry wanderer of the night.
He bowed to her. If the Statue of Liberty had suddenly walked from its foundation and sat down to dine also, Emily's surprise would have been nothing compared to what she felt at this moment.
What's up, Emily?
Asked Thomas, noticing that his cousin was frozen in silence, staring across the table.
We'll conclude with chapters 9 and 10 with the next video.